one defining moment. The universe emerged out of nothingness like a bright idea, and so has each one of us. Born into this world unique and gifted. A masterpiece cast like never before and never after. A magnificent work of art, and each one of us an artist too, eager to paint the canvas of life. Remember as a child, you woke up each morning full of wonderful ideas and dreams. Dreams where everything was possible. You wanted to change the world, and you believed that you could. Believed in superheroes, and believed you could be one. And then it all slowly slipped away. But that does not mean that superheroes do not exist. These heroes stepped out of nothingness into greatness. They were ordinary folks who wanted to make a difference, who believed in their dreams. They were just like you and me, except where everyone else saw the rubble, they saw a palace standing. And when everyone else was enveloped with the darkness of self-doubt, they saw light within.
I am Simerjeet Singh, and I believe that the same light flickers in you and in me. I also believe that you have everything you need to reach the pinnacle of your success. And I'm here to tell you that the only person standing between you and your success, between you and your dreams, is you. And it can all change in the moment the voice inside you says, yes, I can. Yes, I can live with passion and purpose. Yes, I can lead. Yes, I can make a difference. I am the artist and the world is my canvas. I am the superhero I once believed in as a child. And that defining moment is now.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beginner's Mind series. Our guest today has led large award-winning international teams across 3 continents, where he was a global and regional department director, managed teams from Singapore, China, India, and Japan. He has over 15 years of international management and investment banking experience with some of the world's leading banks in the UK, Australia, and Asia. Banks such as Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, and Salomon Brothers, etc. Before he moved to his current role, wherein he's a highly sought after speaker, trainer, and executive coach, specializing in leadership and innovation. And I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk on those 2 topics with him today. He's based out of Singapore, and he is a certified speaking professional. Let me tell you, only 15% of the speakers globally have this qualification, which is one of the highest earned designations of the speaking profession based on revenue, bookings, and performance. Please join me in giving a warm round of applause to Mr. Mark Stuart.
Thank you very much.
Welcome, Mark, and I appreciate you joining us for this conversation here today. I really do. And let me also add, before we go further into our questions today, that he's the co-founder of the Anagram Group, which is a corporate training company, and they won the British Chamber of Commerce Award for the Future of Work. That'll be another one of the topics that we'll talk about today. Once again, I really appreciate you taking up the time, and I must also say that the speed with which your office responded, your openness, and your willingness to join for this conversation is highly appreciated. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to speak with you today.
Likewise. Now, you're a certified speaking professional. I'm sure there's stringent criteria to meet to earn that designation. And public speaking, Mark, happens to be mankind's biggest fears out there. And so many studies have pointed out, people say, I'd rather be dead than go on stage and express myself, right? You must be familiar with that.
Yep.
We've been through our personal journeys, our personal struggles, there's so many things that happen. The imposter syndrome kicks in, there's so much self-doubt kicks in. And I personally feel that so many people, they are left behind in their career growths just because they are not fully confident to say what's on their mind. And so many meetings, so many ideas are not expressed, so many opinions are not voiced, and so many speeches do not flow from the heart. Please, I'm sure the audience would be eager to hear from your experience with public speaking and tips from a certified speaking professional.
Thank you. Everything you just described used to be me. So back in my, I guess, early to mid 20s, I joined an investment bank. Not as a trader, I was working in the operations team, and I started to go out to client meetings. And I had a boss who gave me some rather direct and unsubtle advice that I wasn't confident speaking to people, which is true. I am a natural introvert, and people say, well, why on earth are you doing this job?
Right.
We'll come to the whys later, but the challenge I had was I didn't like to look people in the eye. So that made me not a great presenter. And then I'd overthink things, imposter syndrome, why am I here? I'm speaking to 30, 40-year-olds with all this experience. I've just joined. So he sent me on a 3-day presentation skills course.
Okay.
And that started to give me some of the skills that were required. It allowed me to make corporate presentations. It allowed me to have more confidence when I went into management to at least at the bare minimum stand up in front of my team and start drawing on a whiteboard. And then later in my career, starting to train people and teams and then departments. So I guess it wasn't a natural thing. Some people are natural at this type of thing. They can, not necessarily natural in delivering a message, but they've got that confidence that they can just stand up and speak. And with some fine tuning, they can make a good speaker.
Right.
Some of us have to work a bit harder. So yes, I had to do sort of the hard graft, but still when I left the corporate world, my intention was to solely be a trainer, because that's what I'd started to learn in the corporate space. We went on a train-the-trainer course to help us. I guess part of the reason I came to Singapore was to move some jobs from Australia, where I was based, over to Singapore, and then train up some other teams out in Shanghai and Mumbai. So we got trained up in that, and that boosted the confidence a little bit more. I realized that's what I like doing. Speaking still wasn't on the horizon, still didn't like the thought of standing up on stage.
So you'd overcome the first few hurdles, but still not there 100%.
I was comfortable in my groups of 20 to 40 people in training, which, as you know, is a slower pace. You can be a little bit more relaxed. Not everything has to be perfect.
Right.
So then when I was looking for my new network in Singapore, I decided to be a trainer in Singapore. I wanted a network of professionals. There was a training association that does good work, but I wasn't sure it was the right fit for me. And then I heard about this group called APSS, which is Asia Professional Speakers Singapore.
Okay.
And I heard that these guys were the top speakers in Singapore. It's like, okay, fair enough. And someone said there's a convention coming up.
Okay.
So I said, fine, I'll go along to the convention, see what this speaking game is about, and make a decision then. And I went along to this convention, and I was kind of blown away by the quality of speakers. And it was relatively small in those days. The attendance was only maybe 80 or 90 people, and membership maybe 70 or 80. It's more than doubled since. So I realized at this convention that the impact speakers can make in a relatively short space of time can be a kind of a transformational thing, rather than the full day of training. In 20 to 45 minutes, someone can deliver a speech that can almost deliver the same impact or more, at least from an inspirational side.
Right.
So in short, I joined APSS. I decided to work on the speaking side, and now I guess I'm still predominantly on the training side, but I have an executive coaching arm, and then I have maybe 30% on the keynote speaking side. And that's what my business model's like now.
Which is great. So you sort of found your tribe when you went to these bunch of phenomenal speakers in Singapore. You found your tribe. You had your aha moment.
It was, I don't like to use the word tribe personally, but that is what it was in a way. it was.
I don't mean like a cult like tribe or anything like that.
Oh, some people love the whole tribe thing. I'm not into the word tribe, but I found almost a group of like-minded people. Often people who many have corporate experience. Not everyone does. Right. But we're all trying to improve people in some way, either through inspirational keynotes, through more technical training, through coaching. We're all using speaking as a medium to connect with people and to try to deliver whatever message we have. And I realize it doesn't just have to be American speakers who are over in Singapore. We've got great locals who've also reached CSP designation. So what I guess APSS is just part of the wider Global Speakers Federation. Right. That is a network of speakers across the world. And we have some designation levels that you can go through. That's based on, I guess, the revenue part is one. We are looking to be professional speakers and not free speakers. Right. There's a number of engagements that you have done, the audience size, and then for CSP, you're assessed by your peers. So you submit a video of a keynote, and there's a checklist for other items. And then if you meet the criteria, then you'll get the CSP designation, which is kind of the top level that you can achieve through GSF.
Fantastic. And I feel with something like the APSS group, the cohort, I believe it's but like-minded individuals, as you said, but who are on similar journeys, who are trying to do the same thing, perhaps a few steps ahead. They're willing and open and authentic to share their experiences. So I feel that you did you get sort of the experience of psychological safety that in this group, I'm not being judged harshly as opposed to walking straight into a room full of 2,000 people to deliver your keynote. You're with a more receptive, open-minded group of people. Is that right?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. There's obviously different groups. You've got people who've been there for 20 years. You've got people who've been there for 20 minutes and looking very nervous. And we can all think back to the first time we walked into a monthly meeting. Okay, I can't remember the monthly meetings now.
I do.
It's been 15 months since you last were in a monthly meeting in person. But
how big were yours back when you were working in the corporate world, your monthly meetings? How big?
In the corporate world, they won't be too much. I mean, at the peak, sort of 50 or 60 people, but we used to do sort of country meetings and then direct reports. So it was never too large unless you're doing a town hall or I was helping to train up a new country in some ways. But with the speaker group, when you walk into like a monthly meeting there, you've got people who've been there for 20 years, really experienced speakers. You've got people who are very new on their journey. As you say, we're on the same journey, just at different points along the path. Right. And one of the advantages, because people often say, why should I join, a community like this? It's the support. We support everybody. We have mentoring schemes between the different levels. You'll find that almost everybody is open to either giving you feedback or helping you through or coaching you on development points, even referrals. If I think about, I want to use an associate trainer for my own business. I look to APSS first.
Really?
Because I know there's going to be, we've got our standards around ethics and integrity. And you just kind of know the people within that community who are members are going to have those values that align with my own company.
Agreed.
And therefore, that's always first thought. It's not always where I get everyone from, but that's where I turn to first, because I know people there will be of a certain sort of ethical standard that I like to work with.
And I believe you have to be at a certain point of maturity and sort of self-assurance to be in a place to assist your fellow people in the same tribe that many would sometimes be suspicious of, or you have that competitive streak coming in every now and then. But ultimately, what is great about this group of them, we're in the business of uplifting vibrations and improving the quality of life of other people. And if we can add value to each other, which is something that we're doing, I believe, today through our conversation as well, right? And when people put their professional egos aside or their previous accomplishments, when they put it aside and they come together with an open mind to add value, great things happen in that scenario. So the message is loud and clear, guys. Here, find a group of people who are supportive on your journey of public speaking. Yeah. Find a group of people who are perhaps a few steps ahead of you and who are also at a place where they can offer you advice. And, there you go. Find your right mentors. You talked about meetings and being an introvert, and I can so relate with that, because that's the point. That's where I come from, People ask me, was I always the one to raise a hand in the classroom and volunteer to go on stage or something like that in school? And I said, no, it was perhaps grade 10th or grade 8th when I first went up on the school stage to speak something. And even then I was very nervous, because I was an introvert, or I'm technically an ambivert, So but when you find as you did, Mark, when you find your mission, when you find that, this is something that I love doing, when you go into that state of flow, what Professor Mihai talks about, going into that state of flow, you're one with your surroundings, one with what you're doing, then this thing takes a backseat. It's not as much as a hurdle. And even during my work profession, I remember working for the Grand Hyatt Dubai, and we had a very important delegation coming in. I was looking after the room service part, and this is a 1,200 bedroom property. And I was new. I hadn't been there long enough. We had the general manager, the regional vice president, so many other big shots in the meeting. And I had so many ideas, Mark, at that point of time, but I did not. When my turn came, I did do you have something to add? I skipped, and then I walked out of the room saying, oh my God, I should have expressed what I wanted to. And I think those little things added on, a gradual realization, don't hold your ideas to yourself, even if they're perceived as stupid ideas by other people, because you never know. I mean, because you're going to have this regret later on. Why didn't I speak up? And you work in the ideas space as well, Mark. So the next thing, is there a correlation? Is there a correlation with psychological safety, how employees feel about themselves, and the ideation or innovation that happens in an organization? Are these interrelated?
I think it's huge. I think there's a massive correlation between the two. I mean, psychological safety, it's a concept that's obviously been around for quite a while. It's just become more popular since Amy Edmondson started to promote it more. But it's a crucial thing, because I work with organizations now, and they don't seem to realize they haven't got this environment. They all say they do. But when you speak to the employees, you often hear a different story. And this is something I explore in the training side a lot more than the speaking side. And the speaking is easy to say, you have to have psychological safety. When you're in the training side, you're having these small conversations off with staff. Then it's kind of like, well, do you have it? And they're like, oh, no, the boss always says no, or they shoot me down, or something like this. But you speak to the bosses and they say, oh, yeah, very open door policy here. I know. And that's the gap that I try to kind of close, is a gap between what management think they have and what the realities are. But then the personalities are still there as well. I think I had the environment when I was younger. I didn't have the confidence. Right. So it wasn't until I maybe hit my early 30s late 20s, I started to get the confidence in my own abilities. Right. That I did have a voice. I was always technically good. Well, I like to think I was technically good. But it was when you get into management that you realize you've actually got the opportunity to drive change, not just be a good member of participating in a change. Yeah. That's where the confidence starts to build, and that's where you realize, oh, I can speak up, and it's not about whether the idea is always taken on board or used. It's the sharing of ideas. It's the fact that you might have an idea and it's not the right idea, but it triggers a thought in someone else, and they do have the right idea, but they might not have said it unless you said your part that wasn't right. It's a chain reaction. It's a chain reaction. And we always talk about the idea of building on the ideas of others. And that's how it works. If you've got a group that can openly talk. I worked in the same company, same bank for about 9 years, England, Australia, and Singapore. England was great, but the English are like politically correct. So we always like to make sure we're not offending anyone and use too many words. Australia's refreshingly direct. But we had things, I'd like to think we had things working well for a lot of the time there. Things were smooth, we grew fast, we had most things right. Singapore was more of a challenge, it was more of a cultural shift than it was from England to Australia, not just for myself, but the organization. It was an American bank.
All right.
And trying to drive American, I guess, cultures into an Asian culture locally is not the easiest blend. And it took us a while till we got to the point where we could also have that openness within the bank that wasn't historically there within the local office. But that only works if, as a leader, you're prepared to be open to people challenging, even changing your own thought.
Right.
And that only comes if people speak.
So you're setting an example, you're providing that psychological safety, and that's when people open up. Talk to us about the challenges in the context of a multicultural environment, especially when you have, so for an American bank working in Singapore, being led by a Britisher who has global experience, right? And then how does it all come together? What are things that leaders should keep in mind when it comes to promoting innovation and free-flowing communication in these cross-cultural environments?
Well, before I moved, I spoke to a few expats who are already in the Singapore office. I said, tell me everything about it, because I've only visited for like a week before. And they say, Singapore's got all these attractions. It's like, yeah, but what's the workplace like? It's still the same bank, but I wanted to understand. And they were very good in openly sharing. But when I came in, I was maybe a little bit naive. I thought I could just bring my usual approach, which was, to be honest, it was quite fast, quite direct as far as a communication style. I came with the sort of, I guess, American or Western philosophy of just moving fast, open, talking, speaking in a direct manner.
Get straight to the point,
Straight to the point. We're busy, there's money involved. And it didn't work. It didn't work as smoothly as what I thought. So I had to adjust and adapt. So I think any time you're moving from either east to west or west to east, it's not always a Western thing into Asia. It could be Asia going into the West. It's trying to understand and really learn the nuances about the culture and how people communicate. There's obvious things that are always on blogs about saving face, but when you're in the heat of the action and the stress is on, you often forget about that and you resort to a default.
Right.
So I
to
just
what you're
went
conditioned
saying,
to.
Yeah, I was moving teams across. So we knew the work well. We'd been doing it in Australia for 2 or 3 years. So then we just came across it, right, this is an opportunity to change things. So who wants to change anything? In Australia, I might have got 3 or 4 people say, what about A, B, C, or D? In Singapore, I got silence. And at first I took that to mean, did they not understand? Did they, was my ideas so great that there was no issues? Whereas really, they were technically brilliant, but they didn't feel comfortable yet in speaking up. That I was coming in quite aggressive and fast, rather than sitting down with each of them and speaking and getting to know them and really building that trust up, rather than just assuming the trust was there because I'd been at the company for a certain number of years. But in reality, I didn't have the trust yet, so I had to just take
with
a
this
side
particular
step
group
and
of people,
step back.
right?
Yeah, so I realized a different approach was required until I got, to go back to the psychological safety term, until I got that approach to the level I was happy with. I thought I could do it in about 6 weeks. In reality, it was 3 or 4 months.
3 or 4 months.
Until I got to the level that I wanted, where the technical knowledge that they had was then being used to drive change forward, because we were still growing in sort of numbers. So I wanted to leverage that knowledge they had to have a voice to drive the change, rather than just people coming over from Australia doing it, because we were there for the transition, or half the group were there for the transition. They're only going to be there for 6 months or a year, then go back to other countries and, I guess, have a more local-based staff.
So I think patience played a huge role in this entire thing.
Patience and learning where to adapt, and again, listening to feedback yourself. So I spoke to more experienced staff there and said, okay, this way didn't work. Do you think this approach would work? And they'd either say yes or a no, and you'd adapt. And again, having a network in whatever industry you're in that you can call upon is still one of the most useful things that you can have.
Well, that's great. So it's patience, it's feedback, it's seeking feedback and mentorship, and reaching out to your network, and asking folks who've been there, done that, been through those challenges themselves. Asking
the classic mentor and mentee relationship.
Yeah. This reminds me of a quote by Professor Stephen Hawking, who said, "Intelligence is your ability to adapt to change." And I often quote that in all my change management keynotes. I love that because sometimes you so fall in love, Mark, with your previous accomplishments or what you've already done. And it's you've so fallen in love with them that it's hard to detach from them. And whenever you're in a new situation, the number one thing, as you rightly did in your new setting, was to just detach from your previous success or what you already achieved, and begin with, start adopting the Zen philosophy, which is what this series is named after, the beginner's mind. Which is like, hey, I'm a beginner all over again. I'm going to put my previous experience, my last successes, how good I was in the last role, I'm going to put all that aside and approach this from a beginner's mind and see where that takes me.
Yeah, it's a classic case of critical thinking as well. One sort of story I often share is I'd implemented a policy, and I was quite proud of it. We'd done quite a lot of work. It'd taken months. And we'd got this new process in place that allowed us to handle increased volume. I was quite chuffed with myself. Management seemed to be happy. And you started to join and said, why are we doing it this way when we could do it that way? And at first I thought, please don't change what I just spent months working on. Plus you're new, so you don't understand the culture yet. I hadn't said that out loud. I was thinking it in my head, but the person felt shut down a bit. And then I was thinking about it about 2 weeks later, and it's like, let's have a talk again. So I called that person in. It's like, explain to me from the start, as if our process didn't exist, how you think it should be done.
Right.
And we sat there for about an hour, trading thoughts back and forth. And I realized, you know what, their idea is better.
There's a better way to do it. Right.
Again, sometimes you just have to assess. Are we making assumptions? Do we have a natural bias that all that thing that I just worked on and was so proud of might not be the best way? And you can either stick to it and shut someone down and they'll never speak up again, or you might do that first, but at least try to recognize the fact that you did that, open up the conversations again. And if the idea is better, you have to change. You can't worry about money and time invested if there's a better way that will save you more money and time going forward. It dents the ego for a microsecond, and then you get over it and you move on. You give them, I guess, the empowerment to lead the new initiative, and you just clear roadblocks, and that makes your job a bit easier.
I like the clearing roadblocks part. I often I often use this abbreviation. I say as leaders, you are the CHROs of your organizations, the chief hurdle remover officers. At the end of
I'm not there to do the job. That person had the idea, so they can run with it. I'll just help clear the roadblocks as we go along the way.
And you mentioned a very important point here about taking initiative and having the courage to say, probably I don't have the best idea in this situation. That takes a lot of courage, when especially you're in a leadership position, to say, hey, I perhaps don't know the best way. This is what I think. What do you think? Right. And that's when we talk about engagement and involvement, all those things come in, and everybody wins in that process, because here's an important part of the team who was earlier feeling left out, and now he or she's coming in with the best ideas forward, which is great. Everybody wins in that situation. So thank you for sharing that. Mark, I'm curious about your journey, especially your switch from international management, investment banking with some of the world's leading banks, into doing what you're doing today. I understand the public speaking workshop and the Train the Trainer program had a role to play. But what really triggered it? Was it because like boredom in my case? Was it something big out there? What triggered the change?
Yes. I'll try to tell you the short abbreviated version. I think the challenge that I had I loved my job. It gave me opportunities I wouldn't have had. I come from a small village in England. It allowed me to work in London, in Sydney, in Singapore, travel across the region on business travel. It gave me so many opportunities. I couldn't do the job I do now if I didn't have that experience.
Right.
The challenge that I faced was within the operations world in investment banks. I was working with a product called derivatives, which are complex products that can change any day. Every trade is different. So that always gave me the motivation to work with the product. It wasn't standardized. We never knew what we were coming into the next day. There were going to be trades. Don't know what those trades are going to be. Some days the traders would turn around and say, I've traded a weather derivative. It's like, what's a weather derivative and how do I book it?
Yeah.
But I like that type of pressure. That's what I excelled in. We had client-facing roles. I loved working with clients. The challenge is, as you go into management, you stop doing the day-to-day work. And personally, I struggled a bit with that transition. I could do the management work. It just didn't drive me in the same way. I love dealing with trades. I love dealing with clients. And when
the thrill was gone.
A little bit, yeah. And you're into colored spreadsheets and risk assessments and dashboards, which is all important. Banking ultimately is risk management more than anything else.
Agree.
So, and operations are being outsourced to other countries. You know, I had a team of 20 in Mumbai that have to go out to every 2 months, and we were centralizing some global roles into there because the fact is they could do the job just as well and it was a cheaper location. That's the facts. And I got to train them up and that was great. But again, where was the next thing?
Right.
And I didn't see myself continuing to climb where most of the work would be around, I guess, budget management and maybe outsourcing and relocating. It's great for some people.
Right.
It provides stability, exposure, everything else. There's many opportunities there. It just wasn't for me.
You're moving away. You had that feeling of moving away from what I love the most.
I wanted something more. And it was the more I got into training, even my own teams, or helping to spend time in Shanghai and training some local staff there, going to Tokyo, training some staff there. That gave me the biggest buzzes of recent years.
Right.
So that's what made me realize perhaps there's something in this training side. So what really happened was I was planning to leave the industry. Then I met my girlfriend, who became my wife now. She was feeling a bit disillusioned in her career. So we did the classic rash move of getting engaged and deciding as soon as we are married, we will quit our jobs and try to set up our own business and give it 2 years. We had enough savings for 2 years, and we said, if we can get a sustainable, regular amount within that time, we'll continue with whatever we are doing. If we don't, there's probably a short enough gap to go back into our industries without too much of a loss. So we decided to set up a training business. We moved to Bali for 6 months in Indonesia just to... I guess, take some time out and develop content. 6 months turned into almost 15 months or 18 months. It's a very attractive place. But we realized that as we started to get more inquiries, being in Bali and trying to run a business in Singapore isn't the optimum way when you're starting out. It's something you do with 10, 15 years established business and clients.
Sort of a retirement sort of thing.
Trying to decide whether to spend $300 on a flight to go back for a pitch meeting. You know, when funds are starting to run low, you've got to think, well, this isn't working. So we moved back to Singapore and fortunately we're able to grow from there. And after 2 years, we hit the levels that we were wanting to make it sustainable. And we decided to just continue going on, and we've been doing that for 8 years now.
Fantastic. That's great. And loads of, I can so relate to that because a lot of common components between your journey and mine. I was the sort of the number 2 to the general manager working in a sort of a village in southwest of England called Dorking.
I know Dorking,
That's where I worked for the McDonald White Horse Hotel. And the next steps that I could see, Mark, were to be a general manager, because my general manager would be promoted to either looking after a bigger property, or he would move to the role of a regional general manager. So I sat down one day and I said, okay, what are the next two steps for me? The next step is going to be the GM, which I could very well achieve that in the next 2 or 3 months. And the one after that was the scarier one, which is the regional general manager. That's when I'm no longer based out of one property. I'm no longer running a hotel. I am doing exactly as what you said, revenue management, making sure, every room is full.
Traveling
and,
around.
Traveling around. And the thrill, the joy of being among my customers and my team members and training and mentoring and troubleshooting and all those things are going to disappear. So, and the second thing that I can relate to in your journey is I found my next steps within the existing role at the moment. And I think whoever's watching right now, if you feel stuck in your current roles, don't be disappointed, because there are perhaps corners that you haven't explored yet, which can blossom into something bigger as you move forward, if only you dare to, so like in your role, like you moved into training whilst still on the job, and you discovered this is something that I enjoy more. And I went to a workshop where the question was, what do you love doing the most? And how can you turn it into a profession? Those two questions were very simple yet very powerful for me. So what do I love the most? I love the most developing people is what I love the most. I hire someone as a waiter. I want him to be a supervisor in 6 months' time. I hire a supervisor. I want him to be an assistant manager in a year's time. And I love that. When it happens, when that person grows, I feel a sense of fulfillment like nothing else, right? So, and then I took the Gallup strength test, which again sort of re-emphasized. My number one was developer on that list. So here you have one of the world's leading psychometric testing, and you're on in a gut feeling telling you exactly the same thing. You say, this is something I could do. So that's when I set out on this path. And I think powerful learning here for whoever's watching or listening. There are so many avenues to explore within your current roles that can give you an idea of what lies ahead. As in your role, you did these training assignments, especially in different parts of the world, right? And I think travel is very important here. Would you agree with that, Mark? Travel plays a huge role.
For me, yes. And I've been fortunate as a trainer and speaker to be able to travel around Asia and the Middle East. So I think I've worked in 19 different countries now.
Wow.
And each time you learn a bit more about the culture. And I think that makes you a better speaker and trainer as well, because if you can learn to, and I work a lot with multinationals and very much on the B2B side rather more than the B2C. So every time I travel, I learn a bit more about that culture, and that allows me to hopefully deliver more impactful message for multinationals where there's audiences from across the region, because I might have worked in that region once. Plus, let's face it, you can get paid to travel, do a job, and then you can add a 1 or 2 days holiday at the end of it, and then come back again. To me, that's one of the best sides. And yes, during COVID, that's been difficult to not have that as much. But it's definitely a perk. Actually, part of what you talked about developing people, just reminded me of, I guess for people who are in corporate jobs and maybe thinking, what could be the trigger point? I forgot one of the main trigger points. I'm like you. I love to develop people. And some might think I wasn't always successful, but I always loved that side. And I could get someone to be promoted up and get the knowledge across. I remember once when I was trying to get promoted up to the next level, I had someone in a senior position say, you spend too much time on your teams and not enough time sort of networking with senior management in New York.
Right.
And I know what the intentions behind that message was. It's, if I want to get to the top level, I've got to build my global network, just as much as anything else. That
mingle with the who's who.
The fact is, politics does play a role in any corporation. You might say they don't have politics, but let's be honest, it's there in almost every place. But what that made me realize was, yes, I spend a lot of time on my people and sort of a little bit head down there. But A, that's what I like. And B, the teams were good, you know, from all metrics and KPIs and everything. in most cases, they were high-performing teams.
Right.
And I didn't see that as being a bad thing. And if that was going to be a bad thing, that stopped the rest of my career from moving up. That's what kind of made me realize that maybe it's time for a change where I can develop people.
Right.
So a lot of what I do now is I try to give companies or individuals within companies the opportunity or the knowledge that I didn't have at certain points in my career that I think would have benefited me with hindsight. I had some fantastic bosses over the years, and I try to also bring in what the positive sides of what they gave me as sort of bosses, and maybe give that to other people who haven't had those opportunities. But someone saying I spend too much time on people, that was one of the key trigger points. So I decided to make it my career instead.
So it's not like the people were the means to an end for you, right? As it happens in the case of many leaders, like, how can I use this group or this team to the best of, well, my ability and their ability, and you know, so that I go to the next step on the ladder. You know, when you talk about politics, that's the point of view many people have, right? It's another resource. People are another resource to serve your ends. But what you found and what I experienced and what enables us to do what we do today is the joy of people development, the joy of doing the task for itself was huge enough to continue doing it while ignoring the organizational politics and so many other things, which is great. Thank you for sharing that. No, I appreciate how this conversation is shaping up into our individual journeys, our experiences. I love that. Now, a lot of work that you do, Mark, is centered around innovation and helping. I saw one of your videos, which I loved very much, the innovation hacks, which was about thinking like a startup, which I believe every organization should do. You mentioned that organizations and leaders should focus on doing away with silos, with red tape and bureaucracy. What are your suggestions, having been on both sides, having worked and led large multinational teams, and also now training large multinational corporations? What would be some of your suggestions that leaders can follow in order to facilitate free-flowing communication during these test times?
Well, we've talked about psychological safety, so let's just put that to one side. It's crucial. The other thing is to realize that they're often the obstacle. It's one of the tough things that leaders will say, one of our core values is innovation. And I work with teams below them, and they say they raise ideas, but it doesn't get anywhere. So instantly you've got a block. And this is what happens in most cases. Even with the work that I do, I can give them the frameworks. We can do design thinking. We can come up with ideas in a workshop that are related to their business. But if leadership doesn't support it, and I mean really support it, not just
champion it,
give the verbal support, but actually get themselves involved and listen and approve and take a risk, all that training is going to go to waste in some way. So ideally, I get to speak to leaders beforehand if they're not going to be in the workshops themselves or in a speech. So leaders need to realize that they can be the biggest obstacle.
You could be the biggest hurdle. I hope everybody listen up, please. Yeah, listen up.
Yourself. It is you that's causing the issues, not your team. In some cases, of course.
Why? Many
the
cases.
The other thing is, for me, one, there's speaking up. There's providing the platform or forum for employees to speak up. And it can't just be one, because employees are all different types. We've mentioned the extroverts, the introverts, the ambiverts. They all want different ways. An extrovert will talk in a meeting. The introvert maybe wants a suggestion box. And most suggestion boxes never really get looked at. But is there an online way that they can give their opinions through? Is there one-on-one sessions where they can be heard through a skip level one-on-one or something? So you need different ways for employees to be able to speak up. The other thing is to just give them the opportunity to train or to try things out. I like companies who have hackathons. I know it can be a buzzword at times to have a hackathon, but companies like Atlassian and DBS, they have company-wide hackathons for everybody.
Which is great. And these are not just tech firms,
Not just tech firms and not just tech departments within non-tech firms. They open it up to everyone so they get a voice, because otherwise all that will happen if they just invite the tech teams, they'll get great tech solutions, but are they customer focused solutions? So you need people from all sides. This sort of concept of the cross-functional team. And you need to give them the opportunity to come together, to produce ideas. Don't just have innovation training, have an innovation challenge, have training before a global challenge, and then see what comes out of it. So my old company, Schroders, they trained people up in agile and design thinking, and then they ran a global challenge to come up with the best idea. The end result was an AI-driven chatbot that understands local dialect. So in Singapore, we have Singlish, which is like a mix of, I guess, Hokkien and Mandarin, different sort of traditional languages.
Like we've got English in India. We mix,
same.
And you don't know when we switch.
So this AI chatbot can understand that, and it improves. So it's got machine learning and natural language processing. But that might not have come out unless they provided the opportunity for these teams to work together with some base knowledge of training and then the opportunity to apply it. So that's one of the things that always gets missed is if you're listening to a keynote speech or you're sending staff to a training session, what are you doing after it to allow them to utilize that knowledge? Or to use the inspiration that they have from a speech at an annual conference. A lot of companies still don't follow up, and therefore it's a huge missed opportunity. So it's really a mix of giving staff the opportunity to speak up, to try new things, to give them the basic skills and knowledge. The companies succeeding now, the ones who train staff in digital skills, from all over the organization, who give them an opportunity to speak up, to try things, to be part of cross teams. The traditional way just doesn't really work much anymore.
Well, it worked when, given the resources and the requirements of the era that's gone by. Now, as you talk about when the topics that you speak on, the future of work and so many other things, a lot of things are changing, and we have to adapt. It's not a choice anymore. And once again, I think it's worth mentioning Professor Stephen Hawking, who said, intelligence is your ability to adapt to change. It's not your academic credentials. It's not your current bottom line, your current revenues. It's not your current success. It's how quickly can you adapt to changes. And I think that can only happen, as you rightly said, when leaders welcome ideas, not just welcome and listen to them or print them on t-shirts or on mugs, etc., but also embed processes in their organization which ensure that these things are going to actually see the light of the day, actually flourish as we move forward.
So things sort of worked, but were they optimized? Was it the best it could be? And let's face it, things are changing fast now. And that's where some of the old ways don't work quite well. There's still a place for the waterfall method of project management. But for many things, the agile way is quicker. And we can't really normally wait 2 years for a new system to come in when your competitors might have done it in nine months. So that type of speed requires a different approach. And it really needs to be embedded in the organization, not just in an innovation lab of 6 people, which you set up, and you expect them to produce everything across a firm. That's unrealistic. So it really needs to be embedded within the culture of the whole organization.
Because coming up with the idea is just a small percentage of the entire thing. The execution is, the execution is what makes it. It's the execution,
it's the speed, it's solving the actual need that your customers or your users have. If they've not, I know there's always a saying that people say, I quote Steve Jobs, that the customer doesn't know what they want. And I agree, there's evidence of that over the years, but it takes a certain type of mind to be able to predict and come up with something that the customer doesn't know they want. In the majority of cases, the customers know what they want, but are we listening to them? So that's why I like the design thinking methodology, because we're either listening to external customers or internal clients, which is our employees, and really listening to what do they need to get their job done better, or what do they need to engage more with our products and services. Then you use the internal brilliance to execute on that and hopefully we have a higher success rate than previous projects.
Yeah, which is something that large organizations, especially large organizations, cannot afford to miss that opportunity, because with the small ones, we already, there's a lot more face-to-face interaction, there's a lot more collaboration happening sitting under the same roof, there's less red tape, there is almost no bureaucracy. If the boss is around, you can quickly solve the problem. But what happens in a large setup, that's where you cannot ignore these things. Well, Mark, thank you so much for your valuable time. Before we let you go, I know we've overshot the 45-minute mark. Before we let you go, one very important question is these important things which will take us into the future: design thinking, innovation, right? Creativity, originality. How do we promote more of these traits in our education system? What do teachers, principals, policymakers, what are the top 1 or 2, 3 things we should be doing different, not just in Singapore and India, but across the world, that can help the human race as one to flourish?
I think you've almost nailed it in your question there, that it needs to start in education. Singapore has some of the best exam results in the world if you look at the PISA tables, but I find sometimes that can hamper creativity because we're excellent in getting exam results and following a process. But we know that creativity comes from not always following a process. It comes from taking a risk and not feeling a threat, which is psychological safety. It's realizing that you might try something, it doesn't work and it costs some money, but it was important to try to explore it. Right. So it's as much, to me, a mindset shift than it is a framework like design thinking. So when I talk about agile leadership, at first people go, is that leading like agile software development teams? It's like, no, agile leadership is really a mindset. It's a set of values. It's using agile principles, but it's really saying we need to think differently about how we approach things. That will allow creativity and calculated risk-taking and everything else that we want. But if we're not giving the opportunity to our students, and the change I'm seeing now, even in Singapore, that I like, is they're starting with the secondary school students now and starting to introduce them to some of these concepts. So my hope is that even if you follow a traditional maths and science route, you've had exposure to some of these frameworks and the mindset and the values that are required, so you can use the technical knowledge to help drive creativity even further. So I think if we can get the education right and then the management right in, I guess, the working world, where managers are allowing their employees the opportunity to use this knowledge and this mindset and the values, then again, it becomes a standard way of working. We don't see it as an exception anymore. We see it as just the way companies should operate.
So the combination of the right skills and the right the competence in terms of the STEM subjects and so many other things, not that just alone, but also the mindset, as you said, which allows which promotes divergent thinking, which allows non-linear thinking, and the an environment, especially parents and teachers, where mistakes are allowed and risks are encouraged. Thank you, Mark. And any parting words for especially a large chunk of our audience, Mark, happens to be young people, young working professionals, students, young entrepreneurs. Any words for inspiration, especially those who might be feeling stuck right now in their current situation, current circumstances?
One thing I wish I'd done more in my younger years is just to speak up, to have a voice, to talk to your boss openly about future direction. Where do you want to be? I ended up in Australia because I finally spoke to my boss about what I want for the future, and I wasn't no longer scared to say I want to work in a different country.
To have the conversation,
that would be leaving the team I'd invested so much time in. So yes, you might feel stuck. It doesn't mean you leave the organization. It might just require a change of focus in what your career is. Very few people navigate through a larger organization by staying in the same department the whole way through. So you might have to ask for things, speak up, ask for opportunities, ask to be involved in a project, ask for secondment. Those who just stay quiet, unfortunately, won't get the same opportunities. But if you at least speak up and ask, then you've got a chance for getting the success you want out of your career, whatever career that is.
That's great advice, Mark. That's great advice. Find your voice, folks. Find your voice. I think that's the key message here, because we miss out on so many things. We miss out on so many opportunities. We underestimate ourselves. We underestimate ourselves and overestimate the challenges that are out there. So in the process, we become our own worst enemies. Thank you so much, Mark, for that word of advice.
Thanks for having me today.
It's been a wonderful conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, once we give a round of warm virtual applause for our handsome and accomplished guest today, Mr. Mark Stuart.
Thank you very much.
Virtual high five to you, my friend. Look after yourself in Singapore. It's been a great discussion today. Once again, I thank you for your time.
Thank you. We'll speak soon.